Wanted to just take a couple minutes to show you some of the things from the book here that I think are really important. This financial management book is not easy to read. I'll give you that. It's a lot to kind of digest and dig through, but there's some really important points that do come out of it that I think are good for us to think about as we're wrapping up this semester. One of the things I guess that the author spelled out in this little PowerPoint, that's out there on the blackboard. You can go and take a closer look at as well. These are the key points, and that's important to think about. One of the things I do want to take a look at is what we're trying to do. Let's see, so one of the things that there, this little flow chart is a diagram in that book, and it talks a little. This is looking at our farm year and the financial tools that we need to take a look at during that time. So on this end over here, it begins with our first beginning of the year balance sheet, and that's what we started working through with the egg financial tool and the egg plan. Developing our beginning of the year balance sheet. You can choose whenever you want to during the year to make that start. The key to this is that you do it at the same time every year, so that you have the same snapshot of the farm every single year. It's recommended, the recommendation is to do it January 1, and as close to January 1 as you really can to look at your inventories and things on that. And then the end of the year over here will be December 31st. So you close it out on that. So that's to look at our farm year. How did our inventories change? How did our cash change? How did we look? That's what these two balance sheets will tell us. And then again, we'll start over next year. Well, the nice part about the end of the year for 2017, it's also the beginning of the year for 2018. So it's not like two different things. You just move that in the next time. The other things that we want to take a look at are some of our, the balance sheet gives us a snapshot of time of how our assets and our liabilities are lined up. What's the value of our fund? What's our earned income? Hopefully that's growing over the course of the year. We're working towards paying down debt, working towards maybe having better cash inflows if we can. But the big part of that, of course, is paying down debt and changing the liability side of our balance sheet probably is the biggest part where that'll happen. Some of the other things that we use in this are looking at the cash flows, and that's the other part of the egg plan tool that we talked about is looking at our cash flows. And we want to do, there's a statement of cash flows that's looking at it on the annual part, where our cash is flowing in and out on the annual part of our farm year. The other thing that we want to do is do a monthly cash flow projection and budget over the course of the year each month where our cash is coming in and coming out of the farm business. And that's one of the tools we want to get into using. And the other one on here is our income statement that is taking a look at. In this case, we call it an accrual income statement. So that we start with some of the cash things that we looked at on the asset side of our balance sheet. That's the starting point of that. The other things that you add into that are things like depreciation of your equipment and buildings and things like that. And that's an economic depreciation, not a tax depreciation. We'll get into talking a little bit more about that, of course. And then the other thing that's a part of that is looking at things that you could sell for cash. So if you have crops or in storage at the course of the year, those are things that you will be in the income statement that are accounted for in the balance sheet. And then you can look at that throughout the course of the year. You do what's called a pro forma. You're looking. It's sort of like the cash flow statement. It's looking at where those incomes go in and out of the farm during the course. All those tools are a vital part of keeping us going through the year and looking at what's called our liquidity, whether we're moving cash in and out and how we're doing that and balancing it. Over from year to year, then we can use those to tell how we're growing as the farm business grows along. This chart is just something to help it helps me wrap my mind around what we're trying to do in this first part, is building these tools that we can use that allows us then to take a closer look at our farm on the, we'll go over in a second to that ag financial management tool. The financial dashboard on there what that's doing is taking bits and pieces of all of these sheets, all of these financial tools, and doing some analysis, running ratios, balancing out. We'll take a look at it in a minute, but there's 16 different ratios that the farm financial standards use to tell where are you at as far as a farm business is concerned. Some are more important than others, but we get to take a look at them. Yeah, some of the other things in this chapter is this business planning part. The other part of this chapter that I think we started, the ones that have been with us were in the ag business class. We started last year with defining and developing a mission statement, formulating our goals and objectives. Well, we started defining what is our quality of life factors of being a farmer. What does that look like? And then this part of the course, we're starting to get into these evaluating terms, setting up a balance sheet, setting up our income statement, using a cash flow budgeting tool. Those are the annual tools that we use. Then we can also do analysis from those, which we're going to get into much more in the second half of the semester, and understand what that means. How does that help us grow as a business and keep us in business throughout the course of our farming, our desired farming life? And it gets in a little bit then into these other areas as well. And those are out there. You can take a closer look at those tools. One of the things that I did want another important point from this is looking at some of the risk factors that farmers deal with that other businesses don't. You chose farming not necessarily to be a business maybe, but it is your livelihood to it in order to have a quality of life. You have to pay your bills, and there's some things about farming that inherently make it a different set of risks that you have to manage than other businesses would. He starts to kind of spell these out in a business terms. What do those look like and how they compare from a business standpoint? This is the big one, right? Biologically driven. This is sequential, lengthy, and biologically driven production cycles. What does that mean? You grow crops every year, and whether it is a determinant whether you're going to have crops or not, right? If you're raising dairy cows, eventually it takes 2 years from birth to being a producing cow, right? If you're raising beef, it's depending on the breed that you use, it's somewhere around 12 to as many as 24 months for some of the slower growing breeds to get there. There's a long period of time that you are not getting paid for the work you're doing, no matter what it is that you're doing. And that's very different from a lot of other businesses. I like the way he says it. You can just say you're growing crops and kind of gets the point across for people. And that's, I guess, the big thing I wanted to point out in this chapter. I thought this was an interesting statement. The agriculture sector's financial statements have indicated a relatively solid industry, but one that experienced chronic liquidity problems and cash flow pressures relating from relatively low but volatile current rates of return on production assets. That's a pretty long paragraph that says overall you have a lot of assets, but your cash is tied up in a lot of those assets where other businesses aren't necessarily. One of the big one, of course, is land. You can't produce agriculture without land. Land has a value economically, but cash-wise, it doesn't have a value until you sell it, right? That's a big part of. It's a big difference in farms than business-wise than any other business that's out there. A lot of your assets are tied up in. A lot of your cash cash and wealth is tied up in assets that aren't necessarily liquid, which liquid means cash, essentially. And then, of course, you deal with the markets. Well, if you're a dairyman, milk prices go up and down every month. Right? There's some predictability to when they're going to go, but there's never predictability in how much. Right? And that's become true for corn farmers now too. I guess one of the tricks of the trade is trying to figure out how do you balance, how do you flatten out those lines and do that in a way that is reducing your risk but not putting you in a challenging spot. So those are things we'll talk about and think about as we go through the course too. But this was an interesting chapter, and I'm afraid I just wanted to make sure that you looked at some of these things from here, because it's not easy to sit down and read this book. I like reading Peerless Farm Finances a lot, and a lot of the information is in there too. There was a couple of those charts. Doing the strategic planning is an important part of being in a business, any business, and we forget about that on the farm side of things because we get caught up in what Dan Smith called barn blindness and doing our chores. I'll close this with an attempt at a quote of Dale Norquist, who is one of the authors of this from the University of Minnesota. He's one of the authors of the program he uses. So he's a leader in farm financial management. I saw him quoted in a publication not too long ago saying that the farmers that he's worked with have never known how much they needed to understand financial part of their farm until they did understand it, and then they couldn't believe that they got along so long without it. So take advantage of this time in this class, play around with these tools a little bit, take a look at how they impact your farm and how they'll impact you on your farming life. And if you have questions, by all means, bring them up. It's hard to interact online. I'm trying to set this out here for the online part too. But, I'm here to try to help guide you through that. Take advantage of the time here, the resources that we put, and use these as you go. That's my goal for you. To have a comfort level enough that when you're running your farm and able to have the time to do this, you feel comfortable, go ahead and just. Okay, that's enough for today.